Hey, what's up, guys? Once again, it's MoneyMatters here, and we're back with another video this week. I haven't been releasing them on Monday and Friday as I should, but I'm going to be back on that trend very soon because I've been so busy. But today we're going to be having an interesting discussion on, is it better to rent or to buy? But I'm going to focus more on the disadvantages of actually buying a house. I'm just trying to debunk the myth that it's always a good idea to actually own a house. I see lots of young people in my country, even here in diaspora, they run buying houses because they have been told blanketly that it's a good idea to always buy your own house. Now, I'm not going to say, oh, you shouldn't be buying a house. I'm just going to say there are certain things you should put in place before you can actually take that decision to buy a house. So this is not to, to try and scare you off or try to tell you, oh, this is not a good idea. No, this is to try and give you a different perspective and for you to actually think deeper before you get into that long, deep hole of having a mortgage to your name. If you're going to buy it cash, of course, any day you should buy your house. But of course, even in that sense, if you have cash, then sometimes you might find out from this discussion that it would be better for you to actually have something else that's giving you money. As the rich dad, poor dad says, you need things that put money in your pocket, not things that take away money from your pocket. Assets put money in your pocket, liabilities take money away from your pocket. So where does your house fall? That's the question we're going to be answering. As usual, here at Money Matters, talk about the money mindset, how to make that money, how to enjoy that money, how to manage that money, how to invest that money, and how to assure yourself of a lifetime of consistent income, basically financial freedom. So the main question here is, people have been asking, is it good for me to buy a house? Now, I'm going to be talking mostly to younger people. Don't rush into the idea of buying a house. And I want you to listen to me. A house is never an asset as such. I'm not saying always, but most of the time or sometimes a house is never an asset, especially a house you live in. Listen to that one. A house that you live in is never an asset. Real estate is still one of the best investments, still one of the investments that create wealth, still one of the best foundational wealth creation methods. But if you're thinking that you buying a house, taking a mortgage as soon as possible, as soon as you get that first job is a good idea, maybe it's time to rethink that idea. It's time to rethink that thought, because that's something you have been taught. You have been programmed to think that always you need to buy a house, settle down, and then you don't have to pay rent. That if you're paying rent, you're basically throwing that money down the pit. But is that the truth? Is that the real truth behind this whole idea? Now let's look at it. We know very well that assets put money into your pocket. Does a house you live in put money into your pocket or take money away from your pocket? I know some of you will argue, oh, but I will own the house later in 30 years or so. Now, the first thing I want you to consider is that buying a house comes with so many other risks that you don't foresee as a person. So you need to calculate and think of those risks as a person or as a young person before you get into it. A mortgage is a long-term debt. It's a long-term commitment. And it does say a lot about your life in the next 10, 20, even to 30 years. And therefore, it's good that before you get into that kind of commitment or agreement, you know exactly what you're doing. So what are some of the disadvantages or some of the things that I would consider disadvantages of buying a house? Number one, the additional cost that it comes with. If you own a house, you're going to be paying for lots of stuff, utilities, repairs, anything that goes wrong in that house, you're going to be paying for it. And some houses, especially in the West, for example, or even in Kenya, you find that just one damage can cost you thousands of dollars to actually fix. Now you start asking yourself, was it a good idea for you actually to buy the house? And is it worth the amount of money you're spending on that house? So those additional costs, if you cannot manage to pay them, if you don't have the financial backing or the financial muscle to pay those additional costs, maybe you need to reconsider buying a house. So it's very important to think of the additional costs that come with buying a house before you actually go into buying it. It's not just about, can I afford the mortgage? It's about, can I afford everything else that comes with owning this particular house? And trust me, there will be many. As someone who owns a house, there will be so many things you will need to do for you to make sure that house remains in the same standard that you want it. So that's the first important thing. The other thing is you want to ask yourself, do you prefer cash flow in your life at the moment, or you prefer that security of just having a house of your own? So if you prefer that, you want to have cash flow, and as a young person, you want to prefer cash flow so that you can invest that cash flow in other areas that could generate more income. The thing with the house is, yes, you have equity in there growing. Yes, you have some money in there, but you're spending so much on maintaining the house and the mortgage and everything else that you might not have extra cash flow to get into other things. So the only extra cash flow that you could have is going into utilities and making sure this house runs perfectly well. What about other opportunities? So there's an opportunity cost that we're looking at here. So you have to think of it in the sense of, okay, Do I need cash flow right now? As a person, if I need cash flow, then maybe it's time to focus on maybe having other rental properties if you want to invest in real estate that could then produce cash flow for you to generate and build other stuff, or generate more wealth, or generate more money. So think of the fact that, are you buying that house just because you want that security of owning a house? What's your reason? Because most of us, we have that same mindset and don't question these things. We don't question the fact that, should I own it now? It's not bad to think of owning a house, but is it the right time to own it? Is it going to help me generate more wealth at this particular time? If the answer is no, because you're thinking, okay, I'm going to own this house for 30 years, I'm going to be spending so much money maintaining it, and if I can live in a flexible manner in a more affordable place, then probably I'm able to, own a much better house in the future. But I can also use the surplus income that I was going to put in mortgage and all the utilities to generate more income somewhere else, or to buy another house that I can then rent out to someone and generate money, cash flow every month, instead of me spending money to maintain the house. So these are some of the things you want to consider. It's very important for you, before you get into that contract, that long-term mortgage, to think of why you are getting into it. What's your mindset? What's your reasoning? What's your objective with that investment or that house that you're buying? And then there's the issue of young people making decisions too early. So I decided that I want to buy a house. You buy a house somewhere that you actually might not like, because it's not where you like that you'll be able to afford at that particular time. So most of the time, you're just starting life, you're just starting your career, So you want to buy as soon as possible. Good idea, right? But it might not be a very good idea, because you're not very sure about your future. You're not very sure about where you want to be. You're not very sure where you want to live in the future. So if you're making that decision temporarily, then chances are at some point you're going to want to sell that house. I know you're going to say, oh, I just sell the house and then move. But sometimes it depends on what time you're selling it, how is the market condition at that time. And there are so many factors that come into selling a house. It's not just something you go and say, hey, sold. It doesn't happen like that. It depends on the area you are in, the country you are in, the conditions at that time, the economic, cycles that are happening at that time, and the time it takes you to sell that house actually. So there are so many factors involved in even you selling that house, and sometimes including taxes that could then eat into all that profit that you've been talking about, or that capital gain that you've been talking about, depending again on the tax implications in your jurisdiction. You want to think of it in terms of, okay, is it too early to make a decision on where to live permanently? Because renting comes with flexibility. You can decide to live anywhere at any time. As a young person, you still want to experience life, different environments, and then decide on where you want to live. So deciding on that too early could be detrimental to your own growth, because you feel fixed. However much you say there's freedom that you can just sell it, most of the time you get attached to whatever it is you're paying mortgage for. So naturally, you will be like, okay, you know what, I'm paying mortgage here, I bought this house, let me just stay. So despite what's happening, including other psychological effects or emotional factors that can come in, for instance, the environment you bought being very different years later, whereby now it's not enviable to you anymore, you then get to start thinking maybe you should move. But you know what? Naturally, however much you feel you're free and you can sell the house, you could find that it's difficult for you, because you feel like there are too many obstacles to pass for you to sell the house and buy another one somewhere else. You just feel, you know what? I'm just going to be here. But if I'm renting a house, I can just simply jump off and go to the next place and experience it. It gives that flexibility. It also gives the flexibility in terms of, your finances changing. People lose jobs. Things like COVID happen. If you are with two people in a relationship or a couple, one person might, die or lose a job or whatever it is. It leaves with a lot of financial implications as well. So in that case, you have no flexibility, in that if you lack enough financial capability as a renter, you can simply go to a cheaper place and rent it out. But if you don't have that option, then you're stuck with the house. And therefore, the risks of losing the house actually come alive, and that becomes a really stressful situation for you. So that flexibility in terms of finance and flexibility in terms of you making the decision to live somewhere else is usually overlooked when you're buying a house. And then look at the opportunity costs as well. So you're going to be spending some money taking care of this house, making sure it runs well. You have this asset that you, in your head, is an asset, right? But have you looked at it in terms of opportunity costs? There are certain opportunity or investments that could give you way more money in a much shorter period of time, especially as a young person. You could get more aggressive, because the house, yes, is going to be, doubling its price or its value, in like 7 years averagely, like we say. But if you get other investment opportunities in that period of time that you can't actually take because you have this obligation of a house, so you are in a position whereby you are caught with this house that you keep calling an asset, but the growth spectrum is quite long, and it takes a lot of time for it to get to where you want it to. But here there are new opportunities. For example, people have gotten into crypto world, NFT world, some of the best stocks in the world. They get to experience much faster growth that could actually buy them these houses cash. So you sometimes might end up having or wasting opportunities that could actually accelerate your growth or wealth creation while you're focused on you owning a house. So these are some of the things you want to start considering before you start thinking of a mortgage. And then, of course, one thing that people don't consider is the pressure that comes with owning a house. At the end of the day, this is debt. At the end of the day, whichever way you look at it, you are indebted to someone for 30 years. Now, this comes with the pressure of maintaining a job. You cannot just lose your job if you're working. You cannot just run out of money. You cannot just be flexible with certain things in life. It puts you in a situation whereby you are constantly under some type of pressure, because you know that in any mishap, you're going to lose your house. And that's not something you want because you put a lot of money in it already. So it becomes this thing that is holding you so tight that you can't breathe. Now, you have to think of those pressures and if you can actually take it, and if you feel that this is the best way for you to go, especially as a young person who wants to get mortgage. So these are some of the factors you want to consider before you actually think of getting a mortgage. Now, when you talk about selling, for instance, you also have to think of what are the other things that will come with selling: the excess duties, the stamp duties, the taxes based on capital gains. Have you thought of all the other factors that come with selling a house? Because sometimes you say, oh, I'll just sell it and then move to a different place. Have you considered everything that comes with selling a house? So these are the things that you have to think of way before you even take a mortgage. A mortgage is a long-term commitment and a serious one at that. So don't just run into it because you're thinking, okay, renting is always wasting money. Renting is not wasting money. You are providing money for someone who's providing you a service or a product. In this case, I don't know. So whatever you classify it as, a house as, so it can be a service or a product. So someone's giving you, a house, you're paying them for it, is how everything else functions. Is how everything in the economic environment functions. So the idea of, oh, I'm taking it down the pit actually doesn't apply in economic sense. Of course, you would say, okay, I would rather just pay that money and then own the house in 30 years. But again, that comes with risks that are both systematic and individual, so you have to think of all these risks, analyze them properly, and then come up with an idea that you think will suit you. So what I'm saying here is that I'm not scaring you off from buying a house. You can as well go and buy a house. That's a perfect idea actually, but think of it in terms of, is this going to accelerate my growth or not? And what am I looking for? Am I looking for security of where to stay? Or am I looking for growth in terms of wealth creation? If you're looking for growth, there could be the opportunities for you to actually explore instead of getting into debt for 30 years that you'll be paying and spending lots of money to maintain a house for. So these are some of the things you want to think of. Remember, assets put money in your pocket, liabilities take money out of your pocket. Is your house putting money in your pocket or taking money out of your pocket? Even after 30 years, when you finally own that house, will the house be giving you cash flow, or the house will still be a liability? Now again, you get to a point whereby you could be retired, you're done working 30 years, you paid all your mortgage, but don't have any cash flow to actually live a good life. So you have a big house, nice house, everything perfectly fine, but now you don't have cash flow. You don't even have cash flow to maintain the house in terms of utilities and making sure it's in the right state. So all these things people sometimes fail to consider when they are buying a house. Think of it like a proper lifetime commitment, and only buy a house if you're going to live in it for at least 10 years. If you foresee yourself, of course things can change, but buy a house if you foresee yourself living in it for at least 10 years. That way you get value out of it, and of course, like you say, that equity can actually grow and you can make something out of it. Equity also does not grow in 1 year, 2 years. A real estate investment is a long-term investment. So don't do it with the idea of just living soon enough and then thinking everything will work out. You might end up on negative equity sometimes. Again, remember, we cannot foretell what's going to happen to the economy. Anything can happen. Just like you're taking any risk anywhere else, taking a mortgage is a risk, and you have to consider it as such. Look at all the factors, think of all the scenarios and how you will handle them before you get into that contract. Otherwise, I hope that's helpful, guys. Until next time, I'm out.